Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Natalie Guest. I'm with the Magnolia Business Alliance, and we have Dr. William Burnett and Dr. Nathan Hopper with the Navy, who are going to give us some really great information about how they utilize geospatial technologies. I'm not going to go into their bios because they're quite lengthy, and we have them online for you to view. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Burnett.
Thanks, Natalie. Good morning, everybody. I want to give a quick overview of naval meteorology and oceanography first to give you context of why the Navy is interested in geospatial information systems and how we use them. And then Nate's going to go into specific products of how the Navy uses them. So this is just an overview slide of the Navy. I'm from the Meteorology and Oceanography Command, which is located at Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. We've been here for 40 years. In fact, we just had our 40th anniversary last Saturday. And we enable the Navy to fight and win using all our products available to ensure that we do what we can to observe and predict, and then to fight and win the war. So our mission is to provide information, environmental information, one, so we can use, so our forces are safe, and that we can use that information effectively, and that we also make better decisions than the adversary. Next slide. All right, so a little bit about naval meteorology and oceanography. We go all the way from collecting data to decisions, and you see an arrow that points all the way through. We collect data a number of ways, and I'm going to show you a number of centers that we have, different centers that we have that have in situ systems. One of them is a little yellow glider that you see there on the bottom on the left-hand side, from satellites that we call remote sensed to 6 large survey vessels to collect as much data as we can of the environment. Then we take that data and we put it into a high-performance computing system that's located at Stennis Space Center at the Naval Oceanographic Office, where we grid the data, quality control it, and then receive output that Nate's going to certainly show a number of ways that we display the data and analyze it. So that's what we do next, is analyze and exploit the data, try and understand how the environment impacts weapon systems like spy radars or undersea weapon systems. And then from that, we can tell the warfighter, the fleet, how to use the environment and how the environment's going to impact where they're at and what they're going to do. Next slide. All right, so a little bit about the centers that we have working for us. One is what we call our flagship, the Naval Oceanographic Office. It's located here at Stennis. They have a number of collection assets that undersea gliders, floats. They have airplane, and they have survey ships. They use remote sense data. That's the annotated and analyzed imagery that you see on the right-hand side. We collect all that data and run some of the world's best ocean models in the world to predict, to understand, okay, this is the state of the environment of the ocean right now, and this is what it will be in 10 days. And then from that, we create tactical products that we support the fleet with. Next slide. A little bit more about what the Naval Oceanographic has in terms of survey collection platforms. It says 5, but we're actually up to 6 survey ships. We just took over the USNS Maury, which is located in Pascagoula right now. Those look like jet skis, but they aren't. They're expeditionary survey vehicles, and so we don't call them jet skis, but they go out there and collect data in the nearshore environment up to the beach. Hydrographic survey vessels, airplanes that have LiDAR systems that can collect data. Natalie actually had a report about some of these airborne LiDAR survey collection vehicles on about a year ago in one of her articles. And you see some of the data that's collected at the bottom that you can retrieve from some of the undersea vehicles and from our survey ships. The one on the bottom right-hand side is an image of a seamount, which is very important, of course, for submarines that operate in the ocean, and since they don't have windows, they need to understand where seamounts are located so they don't run into them. Next slide. Fleet Numerical Meteorology and Oceanography Center, they're located in Monterey, California. They actually have high-performance computing systems as well, and they run all our atmospheric models. So they have the Navy Global Environmental Modeling System, or NAVGEM, which is a military version of the atmospheric models that NOAA runs as well. And they collect the data from the atmosphere, run the models, and then provide that information out to the fleet and the forces. Next slide. A little bit more about Fleet Numerical, Meteorology and Oceanography Center. They run global models, regional, all the way down to tactical models that are very small-scale models that tell us how the environment's operating, even as small as Stennis Space Center. You can run a number of different models, which we call global ensemble models, and in the future, we're going to partner with NOAA. We are partnering with NOAA on the National Earth System Prediction Center. So we're going to join forces and create models for the United States and for the military that meet all of our requirements. The next center is our fleet survey team. They work for the Naval Oceanographic Office, and there are some of the expeditionary survey vehicles that you see there. But they do the nearshore environment, and they do quite a bit of work with international our international partners to collect information in ports and harbors and provide that data back not only to the Navy but to our international partners. And then we focus on different warfare areas. So we actually have some of our meteorologists embedded with special warfare, and we have a command called the Naval Oceanography Special Warfare Center. They have systems that they can go out and deploy in near shore to collect oceanographic information, and then they actually deploy with the teams that are out there, special warfare teams, to support the missions and collect environmental information at the same time. We also do mine warfare capabilities, and we have a Naval Oceanography Mine Warfare Center that has similar unmanned underwater vehicles. They're called REMA 600s that go out there, collect information on the environment in different areas, and they actually look for mines and bring that data back. We process the data and we find out where the mines are and then tell the warfighter where they were located and how to take care of them. And then finally, the last center is the Anti-Submarine Warfare Center. We have a number of different groups located around the world. They take all the information that's collected by the Naval Oceanographic Office and turn those products into understanding how sound travels through the ocean. And so we collect data on the ocean environment, on the bathymetry, or the bottom part of the water in different areas, and then we use that information to help the submarine fleets decide where to engage with other submarines if they have to do that. So that's an overview of the Naval Meteorology and Oceanography Command. What I'm going to do now is turn it over to Nate so he can tell you a little bit more about GIS and then how we use that to support the fleet.
Hey, you guys, real quick, I failed to mention that everyone is on mute just to eliminate any background noise. So after Nate finishes his presentation, we will open it up for Q&A at the end. So please hold your questions to the end of the presentation.
Well, thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Bill. So Bill just did a great job introducing what Navy METOC is and what components comprise of our enterprise. As you can see, they're varied and spread across multiple disciplines or sub-discipline areas. What I'm going to try to do is show some examples of some of the data and information collection from those units, and then how we're using those in a decision framework moving forward, and essentially using GIS as a technology and a system behind the scenes as the backbone, as the platform, as the framework to engage in this understanding and context. I always like to start out with a definition of what is GIS, because as it's tied to technology, it's evolved over the years. Some can argue that its infancy was in the 70s from the forestry type applications, but it's evolved as technology has evolved. So I always like to start out with the Geographic Information Systems, which is its traditional definition of what is GIS. Quite often in our own community, we get confused between the aspect of it is a system, is it applied as a tool set, or is it a discipline or a science in itself? And really the short answer to that question is it's all three. And depending on your perspective of where you're coming from, you may look at it as more of a system if you've got an IT background. If you've got a geographical spatial background, you may look at it as a tool set for applying spatial analytics. Or if you're coming in from a discipline perspective, it really is a science in itself. So let's step through this really quickly. This is a traditional definition. I'm not going to read it. It basically describes it as a system designed to capture, store, manipulate, analyze, and manage data sets, which is pretty broad. That can really apply to any system that's out there for managing these data sets. However, it did introduce the main components of the system, and this is people, software, hardware, networks, and procedures. And really the procedures are the business rules that people use GIS to apply in their everyday use cases. And this is pretty much what drove the concept that this is a tool. It's a tool for biologists, it's a tool for meteorologists, it's a tool for oceanographers and those type of things, because they were applying business rules in their own discipline just using geographic information systems at this time. A more recent definition, if you look at this, this is from Longley in 2005. It starts to kind of bring in this concept of a geographic information sciences. And this is where some of the academic systems have gone in the study, in the field of study. And it's really a fundamental field of study that examines the representation, storage, and analysis, again, of geographic information systems. So the science studies the systems itself that use to collect the data, store the data, visualize the data, and how those systems talk. And that's really, you know, born out of this concept of web GIS. The web as a platform for doing everyday activity has grown exponentially and will continue to grow exponentially. And so think of an example like Google Earth used to be something that you would have on your laptop or on your local PC that would be running as an application, where you can now go to Google Maps and do the exact same thing within a web browser. And so that's what I'm going to be showing you now, is this latest definition of geographic information sciences and systems. And this is the one that I prefer the most, is GISS, because it brings in the science and the systems application in together into concert. I do want to say that I'm going to be showing some demonstrations and some applications as we go forward using technology. We, the lawyers here, made me put in this little reference. You know, to any specific commercial products, process, or services, we don't endorse, as the United States government, any of these applications. But I am going to show several things from NOAA, as Bill mentioned. We do work in different classification environments supporting our customer base, so there's not a lot that I could pull directly from our enterprise to show, but I was able to put in some specific examples. And we quite often, you know, I always use these examples as navigation aids. Everyone's used Google Maps, those type of things, but we're going to shift this a little bit into this decision framework, where there's an example of apartment finder, where you go in and put in your criteria, a multi-criteria analysis. I want 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, so many square feet, so much distance from work. You're putting in your criteria for that solution. The system itself doesn't return you individual layers of distance to work, of 3-bedroom apartments, of 2 baths. They take that information and analyze it on the back end and give you a list that meet your criteria. So it's giving you the information that you're interacting with it. So that I want to set that framework because it's going to be important as we go forward. And then again, you know, some weather examples. And you know, when I go out and talk about the Naval Oceanographic Office or our community as a whole, you know, a lot of people look at us from the outside as just being weather. But as Bill laid out in such a great way, that we have many components collecting data. That's just GIS in a nutshell. I know we all have a GIS background or have some access to it. But let's jump into this decision framework. And this is really speaking to the heart of what I want to refer to in this demonstration as we move forward. If you can see in the top left, I'm using Bill's diagram that he showed earlier, where he's talking about the data-centric collection, processing, and prediction, analyzing, and the impact and decision. And quite often we look at it from a data collection science as the data first and working from that arrow left to right. However, I'm going to change this up just a little bit, and I'm going to look at this from a geospatial, a geographical process precision perspective, where you start with the question first, and you're working downwards through the decision, knowledge, information, and data impact. So slightly different terms. Information I'm going to use moving forward for processing and prediction. Knowledge is going to be this analyze and exploit type section, and then decision and data stays the same. This is a Harvard study that uses this term, and I always like to refer back to this. So working outside from the question perspective first, you work backwards through the pyramid. And as you work backwards, the context of the problem increases because you're applying knowledge how something in the environment can impact the question that you're asking. You're gathering information of the who, what, when, where aspect, the 5 W's, and then really getting to the data structure that's required for that. So there's a direct relationship between context and understanding. So as context increases, so does understanding. So for an instance, let me give you a slight example over here on the right. A simple question, do I put a swimmer in the water? First, you need to go back through the tree and say, how does that water impact that swimmer? Is it temperature? Is it currents? What's going to be in that water space that's going to impact that swimmer, vehicle, whatever it may be that you're about to put into the side? That's an example of knowledge. Then you work back to the information layers that's going to be required. That, again, water temperature, current, speed, and direction, which goes back to the data sets that Bill was mentioning earlier, the high-performance computer sets that they were doing the predictive analysis on. Some of the examples was HICOM, and these are just examples that are running oceanographic models. And when I use that term, we're predicting the environment forward in time. So this is really the context. And I'm going to start diving off into some live examples here. What we're looking at here is just a live weather map. And so this is pulling in some radar information, and I've also pulled in some of the major flooding areas that are coming in from the Texas area that we know that they've been suffering some severe flooding here recently. And traditionally, this is what GIS has consisted of, putting layers on a map and being able to interact with them. So the dots are interactive. I can go in and click the dots and see what they observed. Flood state is 27.60. I can see what is considered flood, 26 feet, and then moderate, 27, and major, 29. So you could potentially make some decisions based off of this piece of information. If you saw more storms coming in and you expected rainfall in the future, you would know what areas could potentially be impacted downstream. So this is an example of putting it into a normal 2D space, right? Just a flat area. So I'm going to give some examples of how we can use the web technology and WebGIS to bring this into another aspect. So again, examples of those information layers that we were talking about. This is an example of 2005 typhoons. And you can see from a clustering analysis, you could look and just visually tell where some of the centers of the storms were passing. You're looking at all typhoon tracks in 2005, typhoon pass. But you could, in a normal GIS sense, in a 2D environment, we could color these paths based on intensity. We could do some clustering analysis to look at densities and so forth and so on. But you could really get impacts just from a pure visualization of the information in a different space. So let's look at this in 3 dimensions. So in a web browser, I'm using WebGIS to render this in 3 dimensions. And basically, the cylinder is based on the intensity. The height of the cylinder is based on the intensity of the storm. So if I was to interact with one of the smaller cylinders, you would be able to see a visual representation of the satellite image of that storm at that time and gain some metadata or attributes, information off of that, as well as being able to interact with a picture later in time, per se. So the satellite's showing the storms more forming in a more mature state. But what you're seeing here is in between periods of January and March, which is not the peak of the season. So if I go to August, which was the peak of the season, you can see there's more storms that are happening during that time period. So not only are you looking in 2D space, but we're actually looking at a specific slice of time. So space and time are going to be key as we go forward with some of these examples that we work with. As I zoom out, but really if you're looking at this from a decision perspective, just using that data set, looking at all the storms in the intensity bands, it's really easy to pick out the center of impact or where the density of the highest risk areas may be. You can see all the red clustering that's happening within the area. So if, from a Navy perspective, if we wanted to look at areas of high risk for shipping or for operations or things of that nature in the future, we would look at things and information layers like this to make decisions about force laydown and where we would put ships and so forth and so on. So again, just another example of bringing another visualization technique, the 3 dimensions, into the traditional 2-dimensional type analytics or view space. So moving on, you should see in the left-hand pane the fleet numerical, which Bill mentioned earlier. It's one of our major production centers for producing these global atmospheric and ocean waves models. So again, oceanographic and atmospheric models are predicting forward in time from now, either 7 days, 10 days. So think of it as your forecast when you go to weather.com and you're looking at the percentage, percent chance of rain forward. There's some models behind that. So what we're looking at here is an Earth application displaying the surface winds. So this is an example of a global model being visualized in an application that you're representing the surface. So particles that are colored are obviously areas of higher intensity. You can get a sense of the low pressure areas and where winds are moving around. And on the left side, you actually see a little bit of metadata about the application, and I've included links to the modeling that's coming from NOAA as well. So most of these examples are coming from NOAA and are pulled from the unclassified. So basically have access to these informational layers outside of this presentation. So let's shift from the atmospheric side to a little bit of the oceanographic side. What we're looking at here is a wave height and wave periodicity, which is basically just wave period. And this again is visualized in a way such that it's using these particles to represent the height and the direction of the wave train. And we could zoom in and zoom out if we wanted to and move around on the application itself and choose different areas. So this is not static by any means. So let's shift over to the ocean currents. Here again, we're looking at the same particle stream we were using for the visualization of the wind speeds. But right now, we're actually looking at the ocean current. And current's just representing where the water's moving and how fast the water is moving at the surface is what we're looking at here. And you can see the loop current that's in the Gulf and the Gulf Stream being represented by the different colors that are in this area. And again, this is another informational set that represents the Naval Oceanographic Office. Again, like Bill said, they're in the ocean modeling side of the house, looking at the tactical product side. One of the other parameters that they look at is ocean temperature. So we look at ocean current speed, but we can also look at the global ocean temperatures as well. And so what you're looking at here is a representation of some of that information in a 3D environment, again through the web, where you can start to interact with and move around and see some of the variance in some of the predicted ocean surface temperatures. Where you see the color gradients changing from like an orange to a green to a blue, those are gradients in temperature. So this might be of interest if we're looking for, you know, fishing activity or people doing illicit fishing activity from a Coast Guard perspective. These temperature fronts are pieces of information that are vitally important to that kind of decision or question space. So what you see in the main map here now is a representation of that same ocean temperature, but I want to draw in a couple examples. What I've been showing up to this point has all been what we call surface, or one two-dimensional slice. So think of it, we have water temperature at a specific location, a geographic location, at a specific time of day, and at a specific depth or height. So we've added some dimensions to that problem set. So what you're looking at here is ocean temperature, and if you see the depth slider here on the right side, I can start to work up through the water column and display different layers of water temperature at different ocean depths. So as we become closer and closer to the surface, you'll see that the water becomes warmer and warmer. And not only are we representing that depth component, but we actually have a temporal component by using the WebGIS as an application to visualize this. We can actually play this in time. So you can see, let me zoom out so you can see it a little bit better. You should see some variation, especially up around the loop current area as it plays through time. So you can see how the environment changes over time and how this would become an essential piece of information for someone trying to make an operational decision. Do I put that swimmer in the water? Can I put a vehicle in the water? Do I need to do that 72 hours out? Do I have the right personnel on board to be able to do that? So this is some of the fundamental questions and decision spaces that we're really working in and trying to provide that decision superiority. This is an example of the fleet survey team, as Bill talked about. These are not jet skis. They look like jet skis.
They aren't.
But they're not. We're not allowed to call them jet skis. Because that would just be having way too much fun, right?
And you can't smile when you're riding on it.
And you can't smile. It's a great requirement. So this is an example of the fleet survey team that goes out and collects this nearshore information. And that information could be how deep is the water, are there any obstructions on the floor that would impact operations. And we've done this in crisis support. If you remember the Indonesian tsunami that happened, there was a lot of debris in the water. The Haitian recovery, some of those things are specific examples of where we've gone in and done some mission space. But what you're looking at here is a 3D representation of a harbor area. And you can see the dredging. Now the vertical exaggeration is put up on this a little bit. So it's extruded outside of its normal realms to really show the dredged area here. But you can start to interact with this in not just 2-dimensional space, but 3-dimensional space, just like the other examples. So the color of the representation is the bluer the color, the deeper the water. So as you get to shore, you would expect that some things would start to shallow out. So if we come in here and start to really look at some of this information, we can start to glean out areas of dredging that's occurring, artificial reefs that's happening. So again, this is continental United States, so we have this information from NOAA and things of that nature, but think about the worldwide footprint. I quite often say that our branch, the Navy, is really the NOAA for the world, because we have to go into areas that are not charted, that don't have this information, and be able to provide at least some tactical type of representation. So if someone was to have to go in and land a craft at this beach, or Navy Special Warfare that Bill mentioned, being able to go in safely and at night and what time and so forth and so on. So we help provide some of that environmental impact to those exact mission sets. So I've given some examples really quickly of some information layers. So not really specifically the data, but we've transformed that into information. Now I want to specifically mention this decision framework. And so it requires some of the data that Bill was talking about, those observations, the sensor telling you what temperature the water is, what the salinity is, what the wind speeds are. And then the models that run those environmental models that predict out that variable forward in time, over 72 hours, 96 hours, 7 days. And so that we get this concept of an information service, which is what I've been basically demonstrating for the last several slides. And the definition is that it's structured, organized, and useful. The useful is the most important part, because it can only be useful in a context of a decision when you ask a specific question of it. So that's really important, and why we put this in a decision framework. So you can see clouds, precipitation, and water temperature may be specific enough to answer some of those questions we were asking before, but when you really pull it down into a decision framework with a specific question, can I put that swimmer in the water? Do you need to know what impacts that water temperature has on that swimmer or that vehicle? So this is a decision as an app. So that spatial question of the problem is absolutely necessary to be able to run this into a decision framework. So let me give you a couple examples of some knowledge surfaces. So we mentioned data, we mentioned information, and we're talking about this in the context of a decision. So we create a product called a performance surface. And really all a performance surface is basically a knowledge surface. And that is how the environment impacts something. In this instance, what we're looking at here on the lower right is a piracy performance surface we put together, which looks at the 9-meter, or about 29.5 feet vessel that the pirates were using to hijack ships off of the coast of Somalia. So what we were able to do is look at the wave height of the ocean and the periodicity and predict a performance of that boat in the environment moving forward. So what this was looking at is not saying that they could be there, but how would they perform if they were there? And so you could imagine some of the decisions that were able to be gleaned from this type of information. So you may hear me use the term performance, but really anytime you hear me say that, I'm really referring back to a knowledge surface. Data, information, knowledge, getting to a decision. Don't pay any attention to the math. I broke one of the cardinal rules and put an algorithm up here that's not important. What I want you to look at is the bottom right-hand corner. And sometimes we're asked very complex questions. And one of the performance surfaces we've been working on for the past couple of years is looking at a fishing performance surface. And that's really looking at a specific species or a specific number of species and looking at the environmental characteristics. There we go. Wouldn't be a presentation without a little live hiccup. Yeah, a little live hiccup there. So hopefully everyone can see the presentation back on the screen. Sorry about that. So what we're looking at is a number of species, and anyone that goes out and does any kind of fishing, you know you have a local knowledge about what the environment does to those species. If a cold front comes through, if the water temperature is such, what the tides are doing to the fish species. So what we were looking at is that problem set that I mentioned earlier with that multidimensional data set, where we may have temperature or salinity at a specific location, at a specific time, at a specific depth. And when you start running this suitability modeling or this multi-criteria analysis, that GIS analysis under the hood, it becomes a very complex problem really, really quickly and trying to solve. So we're working through how we can apply that through the multidimensional space and be very successful in that. So I want to introduce this concept as what we're talking about with decisions, right? Decisions as apps. We all have access to our cell phones, and we're used to downloading apps for specific purposes. And this is really that explanation of that decision framework, the question, right? Just a question as an app. But the difference here is we've taken a new approach, and by using this web platform is how we're delivering the access to this app. So it doesn't have to be downloaded to your local device and run, or it doesn't have to be downloaded to your laptop or your local desktop to be executed. You can execute the application through the web itself, just like Google Maps, doing directions and so forth and so on. So here's an example of a specific question. So as Bill mentioned, when a submarine, since it doesn't have any windows, its eyes is really sound in the water. And being able to see seamounts and underwater obstructions and enemy forces or whatever it may be, whatever risk is out there, how sound propagates in the water is a very important environmental impact to those type of operations. So what you're looking at here is an example of an information layer, where it takes a certain sound frequency and says, what will the environment, what will the water column do to that frequency of sound? That could be temperature, it could be density, it could be salinity, any of those variables. And then it produces these zones of what will happen to the sound. But really, you still can't gain any type of decision space off of that. You just know what the environment's doing. You can't say which area is safer and which area has more risk. So by taking that a step further and looking at the information and transforming that into a knowledge, like a performance layer that we were mentioning, this is looking at the suitability of those areas per that frequency. So you get areas that are better versus worse. Where can I see? Where can I not see? What is risky? What is not risky? So what you're looking at is areas of blue is safer and brown is more risk, or better or worse. Suitability, right? Under the hood from a GIS perspective. But you can see how we've transformed data, water temperature, salinity, into information, which is what will the environment do to that, and then how does it impact that frequency from a knowledge perspective to get to a decision layer, which could be some routing that we're all familiar with. So think of an example of your Google Maps or your Apple Maps or whatever navigation app that you're used to using. You give it a location where you're at and where you want to go, and it's producing some of those routes for you. This routing analysis is just looking at the underneath ATA, that acoustic terrain analysis, as a cost surface. So the safest route is going to try to stay in the blue areas, or the riskier or evade route will try to stay in the blue areas, and then the fine route will be in the brown areas, or vice versa. So an example of a decision being made in an application, the decision as an application. So moving forward, let me give you a couple examples of a knowledge surface. This is a NOAA sea level rise scenario. And if we're all on the Gulf Coast, we know how important this type of information is to us. And we could potentially make a decision here about, where to locate a business, maybe purchasing a home, some of those type of things. But you're looking at the 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 feet type sea level rise in a normal two-dimensional space, right? So you can get a sense of area impact. But let's take that a step further and let's talk about impact. So how do you basically visualize this knowledge surface to give the desired effect? Same application we're looking at here from NOAA from that sea level rise, but what this allows us to do is look at the impact in the local area based on a slider. It gives me, the user, the ability to slide between the 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, so forth and so on, so I can get a sense of what that area impact is going to be. Again, sometimes it's a little hard to conceive how much area this is going to have or what this might have an impact to the local environment. So one of the interesting things in this application that they've done from a visualization perspective is tied in local landmarks. So here we see the Beau Rivage Lighthouse. And if I take the slider and move it to the right, 1 feet, 2 feet, so forth and so on, you see the visual impact of the water on the right side. Do you see it actually coming up over the pier? And if I go to a full 6 feet, the pier facility is completely underwater. So it's taking a local landmark and then being able to use that to convey impact. So let me do another one over here. Let's slide over to Bay St. Louis, and let's take the Bay Wavelet Yacht Club. So if I come down, and you can see the actual boat launch there at the Bay Wavelet Yacht Club. And if I interact with that again, you can see what impact 1 feet, 2 feet, so forth and so on is going to have up to the 6 foot mark where it's completely submerged and underwater.
Is that live?
That is live. So I wouldn't go there right now. But again, I think it's a great example looking at how to communicate information and knowledge and impact. The traditional 2D map, people may not be able to conceive what impact that would have on their normal day-to-day lives. When you really put this in context of something that they're familiar with, do you get that conveyance or that impact of that information? So those were knowledge surfaces and examples of those. So let's look at a potential decision here from a live scenario. The National Ice Center is one of the components that Bill mentioned earlier. And so their charters to keep up with the ice extents and their partnerships with NOAA and things of that nature. What you're looking at here is ice extents from 2011. So let me zoom in a little bit so you can see. So the purple areas, if you can see that on your screen, delineate January extents in 2011. And then the blue areas just inside of those extents represent July extent in 2011. And so this might become important if you're looking at these routes, and you can see these Arctic shipping routes, the Canadian shipping routes that they provide here on the lower right-hand corner. And you can see that that informational layer alone might be enough information to make a decision on that route location. So you could specifically choose one route or the other based on the sea extent. Now, this correlates back to our early examples of weather. So how can we take this and move it into that knowledge space or that performance space? What if we took the ice thickness and then tied that to a specific vessel type, an icebreaker, and tied that to a thickness that the icebreaker could perform? Now you put a layer of knowledge on top of that someone could then make a decision on. Maybe that route is more safe or less safe depending on the thickness of the ice. So that's an example of moving this into a specific decision space. So this is titled GIS Process Improvement, but I really want to speak to it from that decision framework perspective. Remember, we rolled this into a specific question. And one of the byproducts of that has been some process improvement. So by working through that question to knowledge to information down to the data set, we've been able to work in certain processes and basically improve those processes by moving it from a desktop to a server environment and then eventually to the web environment that we talked about. So the acoustic analysis that I was showing in the presentation, looking at the frequency and how the water column impacted that frequency, with normal production time running on a desktop in its current processing state would take around about 5 days to process out that answer. So correlate that to a decision. If you want to take a weekend vacation, can you submit a request for information and wait 5 days for that to come back so you can make a decision what to pack? I know my wife would have me hung, and that would be it, because she starts packing 2 weeks in advance. My whole spare bedroom is packed out for an emergency trip. So by moving that into a server environment and allowing the applications to start interacting with it, we were able to take that same business process that normally takes 5 days and get it down into a couple minutes. But really, you think about this from a perspective, if you're on a website and you click something in a normal day basis and you have to wait 2 minutes for an answer, most likely you're going to move on and think that that website is not responsive or that the information was just too complex to come back. So we're really moving it into the future of geoprocessing, which is mosaic data sets. And I don't specifically spend a lot of time on this, but if anyone has any questions of what that means, please feel free at the end or email me afterwards, because the mosaic data sets within functions is the next generation of geoprocessing, if you're familiar with geoprocessing, which is a framework for doing all your analytics. So that we're down into that 1 second response time. So that becomes interactive. So that sea level rise that I was doing when I was taking the slider and moving it between the sea level rise, that was a native response coming back to me in that web application. I didn't have to wait 2 minutes for that answer to come back. So this is another example of that fishing performance. It's the same type of characteristics. You see the 3 days, 5 hours, 1 second type of a response. So, this is kind of how we're answering the mail of do more with less. We're in the same boat as everyone else. We're asked to do more with less every day. So we're looking at these process improvements and how we can use GIS to capture those process improvements and be able to provide that decision space forward. We're also continuing to work on these dynamic information sets, where we're taking the time that it creates, as Bill mentioned, to collect the data, to create and run those models and the information that's required to answer those decisions. We're trying to shorten that time frame such that the information and the representations of that information can live as close to the parent data as possible. What that means is as soon as that comes off a supercomputer, that file hits a server and we're out serving out, representations of that. Could be sea state, could be winds, could be those conditions. We're trying to shorten that time span to make the information as useful as possible. So like Bill said, we're predicting the environment forward. So if we have a 12-hour or a 16-hour delay, that information is now lagging. It's old. It's no longer relevant. So we're trying to shorten that window. And these information services are key because they are the foundational pieces that allow the decision applications to be built. So that's kind of what we're working on now, but let me talk about a little bit of the future growth areas. And so what we see, and you can see up in your upper left, we're looking at big data. These environmental models that come off and all the data that we collect are very voluminous in nature. Terabytes upon terabytes upon terabytes worth of data. So how do we store those? How do we get access to those? Artificial intelligence. I didn't really hit on that a lot, but as we get access to the systems becoming live on these data feeds, artificial intelligence is going to be key moving forward. How does the system make some decisions on its own? And then looking at augmented and virtual reality space. So augmented in virtual reality would be putting those environmental conditions on a viewer in real time that people can start interacting with those data sets. I think that's a huge growth area from a visualization perspective because we talk about that impact. So correlate that back to the sea level rise to those JPEGs. Now imagine being able to walk around in a virtual environment or an augmented environment and see weather impacts going forward through a goggle glass or a Google Glass or any type of viewer that you may have, an iPad. So you can start to see that be a great medium for conveyance of that impact. And then one of the areas that we're working on here, and that Bill may want to jump in and explain a little bit more, is these unmanned systems or drones. And you can see the explosion of drones within the commercial industry as we're moving forward now. And what you're looking at here is a quadcopter collecting, or a drone collecting some environmental parameters. And it's in a 3D web scene again, so we can actually interact with the data itself. The color dots represent temperature, air temperature. So if I was able to click on one of those, you should see the height come back in meters, the temperature come back, pressure, and humidity. And then you can link and hyperlink to other content as well, like the temperature plot, which is the overall temperature on that collection mechanism as it's plotted over time. Let me go back to the application. And then I'm going to fire off a quick little video here from YouTube. And hopefully you guys can hear and see that.
Drones have become a technology with great appeal for GIS users. Until recently, aerial photo data was expensive or hard to acquire. Drones can capture customized, high-resolution imagery for a fraction of the price. Many GIS users have found the promise of drone footage to be too good to be true. Getting that drone data into a GIS and making it work for you can be a complicated endeavor. It doesn't have to be complicated anymore. Drone to Map for ArcGIS is the easiest way to transform a drone from an image capture device to a powerful productivity tool. Drone to Map for ArcGIS was developed for the industry-leading ArcGIS platform by Esri with one goal in mind: to quickly turn drone data into ready-to-use GIS imagery. Drone to Map for ArcGIS integrates the entire workflow from post-flight to the final imagery product. No more third-party applications for image processing, analysis, and sharing. Instead of going into the field multiple times, get it in one pass by checking your drone data before you return to the office. Automatic defaults allow you to build stunning information products faster than ever before. Point clouds, mosaic datasets, 3D meshes, and orthomosaics. View 2D imagery in 3D from any angle. Drone to Map for ArcGIS. What will your drone do?
So as you can see from that short video, again, we're not endorsing Esri by any means, but that is just an example of bringing drone information into a GIS in a quick environment. And as these become cheaper and cheaper and more readily available, you can see the large volume of information and data that's going to start flowing through these systems. And so getting back to tying it into that GIS as a science and a system is, how do those systems talk? How do they store data? Artificial intelligence, what is identified from those live data streams? How do you identify those and then present those in an impactful way so someone can make a decision off of that? So that's just a quick example of some of the drones and what we're looking at expanding. Bill, do you have anything you want to talk about unmanned?
Just that the Navy is certainly moving forward with the underwater vehicles, the unmanned underwater vehicles, and we're putting quite a few things in place here at Stennis Space Center to house them, warehouse them, to maintain them, depot level maintenance, and using parts of the Gulf of Mexico to do a testing range so we can really explore and expand the amount of unmanned systems we have out there.
So with that, I think that brings us to conclusion. You see references here, just a couple quick notes on the application itself. The application is live, so at any time you could go and pull up this link, and we can send those out as well as part of the notes. So this app is up and live, and you can hit the data sources, interact with it, play with it. Again, any questions I'll be glad to field. We'll be glad to field via here after the session, or email later. So I'll turn it back over to Natalie.
All right, we're going to go ahead and unmute everybody so that if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and feel free to ask now.
No
questions?
Any questions? Did everyone fall asleep, or?
Nope. Can you provide your email addresses so you can contact you offline?
Yeah, absolutely. I think were they included in the bio?
No. So as a follow-up, this webinar is being recorded, so I will make sure that I get the YouTube URL to you guys, along with the links that Nate is providing and their email addresses. That way, if you have any questions, you can certainly follow up with them personally.
Okay, thanks. And good briefing. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate you guys coming in. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
What do you see your budget looking like for the different areas that you highlighted? It looked like you were focusing on the growth areas. Is there upside, downside? I mean, what's it look like for the next fiscal year?
Well, the budget, of course, isn't increasing. It's for the Department of Defense. It's on a downhill slope right now. But what Nate highlighted, and I think what we're trying to highlight, is using technology out there to mitigate the impacts of some of the budget cuts, and doing what we can with technology and with industry to continue to support the fleet.
Right. You mentioned early, this is Rick, you mentioned early in the presentation focus on mine warfare, but I didn't see anything as you went through the briefing. Can you elaborate on that any?
Well, it's mostly using unmanned systems to go out, and if there are mines located in an area, to use an unmanned underwater vehicle to go over the area and collect information. You can find where mines are located with those unmanned systems. You process that, and then you decide if you have found a mine, you can go back and use other types of technology to disable it.
Right. And I mean, do you currently, are you satisfied, or is the Navy satisfied with the approaches that you're currently using for mine detection and identification?
I think with the systems that we're using for the identification, that's working fine. It's the issues that we're having is there's a lot of data that's collected on the system, and right now we have to wait to retrieve the system and download the data before we can process it, and that can take a number of hours, which is frustrating because if there is a mine in a certain area, we don't have time to wait to get the data, download it, process it, analyze it, and then get back to the fleet to tell them if there was a mine there or not. So finding ways of getting the technology to get the data off the unmanned system while it's underwater is crucial right now.
And from a GIS perspective, we could take that information. One of the bullets that I mentioned in the growth areas were artificial intelligence. Using some training data sets to understand what the bottom type is, what the current. So the system itself has some intelligence to it to be able to shorten that window to that processing. So you may not have the full validity of a checked answer, but the answer may be good enough to make a tactical decision off of in real time versus having to wait the time to get the human in the loop type of answer back.
Right. Do you can you point to some place that shows approximately what your onboard processing capability is, if there was some interest in providing some onboard processing that would give you that 80% answer before having to download the data?
So the systems we're using right now are built by Hydroid, and they're called REMUS 100s and 600s, and that would be the best places to go to Hydroid's website, and they can get questions there.
Cool. So I'm interested because as part of my doctoral work, I developed some techniques to use fast wavelet processing to identify damage state in nearly real time from collected imagery due to tornadoes and the hurricanes. And one of the things that I didn't document in my my thesis, but did some work on, was identifying things like buried mines and underwater features that might be of interest. So I saw the results of the ability to process the data in real time on a platform, but just hadn't been able to pursue that very much until now.
That sounds great, yeah. So we're not endorsing technology, a specific technology, but if there are capabilities that another group or another platform can come in and provide those improvements that I talked about, then the Navy's certainly interested in exploring and using them.
Cool, cool. And who would can I have a more detailed conversation with you or somebody else that I should follow up with?
Yeah, we can have somebody follow up with you.
Okay, cool.
So an example of one of those artificial intelligence, like you said, onboard processing, one of the dissertation research topics that I focused on was trying to correlate river width to depth, trying to answer how deep is the river. So we were able to train up a network behind the scenes such that you could put in one variable, one observable, shoot a laser and see how wide the river was and get a probability of depth.
Yeah, exactly.
So that goes along the same lines that you were discussing earlier.
Yeah, there's some, it's complex to figure out, but the implementation of a wavelet transform, you're probably familiar with Fourier transform analysis?
That's correct.
Yeah, well, wavelet transform basically allows you to not only figure out what frequencies you've imaged, if you will, but where specific ones are. So I can tell you in a scene where there's high frequency, where there's low frequency, where the fast Fourier transform only tells you what's in the scene. So you can basically output a map of frequency content in real time, essentially on board something that's got decent processing capability.
That's very cool. So I see a couple other people still online. Any other comments or questions? I know we're getting close to our time here.
Right, Calvin, we saw that you asked if there was any tracking of sharks, and Nate responded yes, that NOAA does this now, and that you can find that information on their website. But from a Navy perspective, there's not really anything else to discuss on that activity in tracking sharks, besides the fact that there have been some recorded footage of sharks attacking buoys.
Yeah, unmanned systems.
Unmanned systems underwater, which is quite interesting.
So hopefully that wasn't too boring. Everybody had a cup of coffee, could stand up, stretch, all the good stuff.
Well, we certainly appreciate you joining us this morning. And like I said, this is recorded, so I'll get it out to you as soon as possible, along with the links and contact information.
Great. Thank you.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.